I would like to introduce you to Reverend Dr. Alvin Sanders, who today serves as our president and CEO. He came to us with church planting background experience because he and his wife planted River of Life Church in Cincinnati, Ohio, 23 years ago. That church is still thriving, even after moving through leadership changes, which is pretty remarkable for a church plant. After River of Life, he moved into a position as a denominational leader and then came to World Impact as our CEO. So Alvin, we are looking forward to hearing about the data from you.
All right, thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, this mic, man, I got a heavy voice, so I'm gonna have to watch myself because I'm gonna blow you all out. So, as Sarah said, I'm Alvin Sanders, President and CEO of World Impacts. What I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through the study, the highlights of it, be about 20, 30 minutes tops. I have a problem, and that is whatever I do, I end up preaching. So I'm gonna try not to preach, y'all. I really am. I'm just gonna walk you through it, okay? And then at the end, we're gonna have a Q&A session. So when you hear different things come out and you say, oh, I wanna know more about that, note that, because at the end, we're gonna have a vibrant Q&A session, all right? But I have a manuscript, I got my stopwatch. If I'm mid-sentence, I'm done in 30 minutes, all right? So let me start. So, wait, do I have a clicker up here? Yes, I do. Okay, thank you. Oops. I'm going backwards. I'm sorry, y'all. Wait a minute. Here we go. So, World Impact and Barna Group direct research in 8 major U.S. metropolitan areas: Atlanta, Los Angeles, Portland, Oregon, Phoenix, Chicago, Cincinnati, Philadelphia, and Houston, Texas. So this is very relevant for you all because you were one of the cities that were surveyed. We selected these metros to be geographically representative of the U.S. as well as representative of various dynamics of urban life, such as city size, racial composition, economic legacy, and structures of the built environment. In these places, a comprehensive qualitative assessment was conducted that featured 10 pastor interviews, 5 community leader interviews, 5 civic leader interviews, and 8 focus groups, totaling 40 unchurched participants. Additionally, across these same metro areas, Barna administered a quantitative online survey of 2,000 U.S. adults, 1,000 church defined by having attended a church service in the past 6 months, and 1,000 unchurched defined by not having attended a church service in the past 6 months. And we have to look at a couple of the different terms that are relevant to us today. First term is urban. When we say urban, what do we mean? If you're talking to a sociologist, urban means the 3Ds. 3D, diversity, people from all walks of life living in the same geographic space. Density, the amount of people in any given location. And distance, which is the way time and geographic space is viewed. So for instance, World Impact is headquartered in Los Angeles. If you ask somebody in Los Angeles, how long does it take to drive from point A to point B? They start with traffic, right? I don't know if that's the same way here. Like in Cincinnati, it's like 20 minutes. But in certain places, it's with traffic. So it changes, these 3Ds changes how you view the world, okay? Diversity of the people you live around, the amount of people you live around, and how you view time and space, that we say distance. However, for the Christian, urban is what is termed a codified word. When the average Christian hears the word urban, they think it means black, brown, and poor, which is not necessarily always true. The importance of urban is that it affects our world in every conceivable way. So I'm 54, which means I'm the beginning of being old. That's what I think, right? I'm still young, that's right. I remember when hip hop started. I'm old enough that I can say I can remember when, right? And if you'd have told me back in the day that you would see Lucky Charms rapping, right? And how it's gone and how it's affected everything, I would have told you were crazy when it first started 50 years ago. Well, hip hop, if you didn't know, was born in the Bronx, in a poor neighborhood. Rhythm and poetry, rap. They could not get into the Studio 54 discotheques of back in the day in New York City, so they created their own disco in the parks with their own music and created a whole genre that has affected the world today. That is just one small understanding of what urban means to the world. You can move to the moon, and urban worldview will affect you. So we have to value that and understand what it means to be urban, because wherever your church is, wherever your ministry is, wherever you live life, the urban context has an effect on you. An easy way to state this importance is if the city sneezes, the suburbs and the countryside catches a cold. So if you want to know what suburban and rural churches will face in the future, look at what the urban church is dealing with today. And here are 6 challenging questions that urban churches are engaging right now. 1, can strong faith grow in an increasingly secularized context? By the way, I forgot to say at the beginning, all of this stuff, you will get it at break. So if you're not taking notes, don't worry about it. You're going to get all this at break, okay? 2, how can we champion the pursuit of racial justice in painfully polarized times? 3, what does vocational discipleship look like for a success-oriented generation entering an ever-evolving workforce? 4, how do we come alongside those facing the problems of poverty and homelessness? 5, what can churches offer to soothe anxiety and help people heal from traumatic experiences? And 6, what on earth do we do with our physical buildings Monday through Saturday? So now let's talk about the meaning of church. When we say church, it typically references a building. However, we really mean much more than that. We are referring to a place where a group of people come together under the power of the Holy Spirit for the purposes of fellowship, teaching, prayer, service, and personal development. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are considered evangelistic books. They tell the story of Jesus, our King, who is establishing a new kingdom or way of life. Then a plot twist takes place in the book of Acts, and the story pivots to focus on the establishment of local churches. Jesus had told the disciples in Matthew 16:18 that he would build his church, and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. The church is God's chosen institution to bring hope to the world. I love the way John 1:14 is stated in the Message translation of the Bible. The word became flesh and moved into the neighborhood. For me, that is a great description of the meaning of church. So when we are talking about urban churches, we must ask ourselves, how do we move Jesus into urban neighborhoods? Because as I previously stated, context matters and lives are at stake. So here's the current situation. To move Jesus into urban neighborhoods, there are 3 things that need to be addressed. The first is that historically, when urban spaces have not been valued by all U.S. Christians. Frankly, Black, brown Christians have never left the city. It is changing nowadays due to gentrification, but traditionally, there was a great exodus from all things urban. There needs to be a reentry if we're truly going to reach our country. People who tell me, oh, I want to see revival. I say, oh, well, what are you doing hanging out in these cornfields then? Because if you want to see revival, you got to be a part of the city, because 90% of America lives in 11 mega regions. Like, you live in the Texas Triangle, if you didn't know that or not. And it's really weird because the Texas Triangle is actually 4 cities. So I don't know how they got triangle out of it. It's Dallas, Houston, Austin, and San Antonio. Like, most of your state's population is in those 4 cities. So if you tell me I want to reach a ton of people for Christ in Texas, you can't be hanging out in the fields. You need to be in the Texas Triangle, because guess what? If you reach the Texas Triangle, it's going to trickle out to Laredo and Amarillo and everywhere else. That's what it said. That's what sociologists and I got the Sarah disease. Demographers, or maybe it's just my ebonics. It might just be my ebonics. The people who study demographics, how's that? There we go. All right, second, the meaning of church is being contested. Right now, there is a lot of what is termed deconstruction and reconstruction going on. The dialogue is heavily influenced by political, economic, sexuality, and racial forces colliding, competing with historical theologies. What is clear is there is a new understanding of what it means to be the church emerging. Whatever it meant to be the church, whatever it meant to be evangelical, it's dead. What is happening now is a redefinition. And some things needed to be redefined, other things not so much. But that's what's happening right now. And lastly, concerning the urban church, our perception of community engagement is not meeting reality. Concerning perception versus reality, when I was pastoring, I used to tell my congregation we need to pass the McDonald's test. The McDonald's test is this. It's like if this church building was a McDonald's and it went away, would the neighborhood notice? I guarantee they would. They'd walk by, they'd drive by, and they'd say, where did McDonald's go? But when it comes to our church, and our church went away, would the people notice when they drive by? Or would they say, I don't remember what used to be on that corner? So that's what the McDonald's test is. According to the Inside Urban Church report, 84% of church metro residents say, if my church were no longer present in this community, it would be missed. But only 33% of unchurched metro residents say they are very or somewhat familiar with the people who attend churches in their community. Now, I went to Bible college and my math ain't that good, but a difference of 51% is a problem. It's quite a difference. And we have to do a better job of connecting with the neighborhood. And that's the challenge. We've made inroads, but there's still a lot of work to do when it comes to moving Jesus into the neighborhood. I think there are three major challenges that we have before us. The first is, how do we offer a chance for connection? Like Jesus met the woman at the well, we hope to figure out how to meet people where they are. Because most of the time in urban spaces, people don't just waltz into our church buildings and find Christ, even in the Bible Belt. The second, how do we have a positive influence? To show people the way to Christ starts with relationships. If the goal is to spread the gospel, a tried and true saying applies. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And closely related is the question of, how do we show the neighborhood our value? Christians in urban contexts are looked upon cautiously. We hear what you're saying, but is it true? They see better than they hear. So the gospel must not only be proclaimed, but also demonstrated. All right, so this stat shows the door is open to connect with our urban neighborhoods. A big percentage, 38% of the urban unchurched, say they have neutral experiences with the local church. To be neutral means you could go either way, for or against. It is open ground. Notice that only 12% have either a negative or somewhat negative experience, and 29% have either a positive or very positive experience. Again, doing my Bible college math, that means that 67% of the unchurched urban population is open to being approached by the church. If you ask me, I think it's like hunting at the zoo. Your targets are right there. The question becomes, how do we go hunting? Well, I think it starts with developing a desire to hunt in the first place. Our report found a significant hurdle. Look at the grayed areas, which is neutrality concerning our neighborhood and roles and expectations of our neighbors. Churches and their leaders aren't seen primarily responsible for local needs. They don't see us as meaningful change agents. And maybe more concerning, we don't see ourselves as change agents. From the church perspective, only 40% see religious organizations and 37% see Christian churches as being responsible for neighborhood transformation. Biblically speaking, that should be 100%. As expected, the unchurched see both even less at 31% and 26%, respectively. In urban spaces, when people want meaningful change, they trust the government, their neighbors, other nonprofit organizations, schools, businesses, and major corporations to bring change more than our churches. There's something wrong with this picture. So, how do we change it? Well, the data point of view is we can move Jesus into a neighborhood in a very simple and particular way. Because we know when Jesus shows up, meaningful change happens. From the data point of view, leveraging credibility and building belonging could be the best way for urban churches to help neighborhoods flourish. According to Dr. Tyler Vanderweel of Harvard University, human flourishing itself might be understood as a state in which all aspects of a person's life are good. It is not only a momentary state, but also something that is sustained over time. He proposes there are 4 pathways towards sustainable flourishing, which is this: family, work, education, and look at what Harvard found: religious community. In other words, when these things are going right in a person's life, they flourish. That's a non-academic way of saying it. When a person is good with their family, for the most part, when they have good work, when they're properly educated in terms of they have enough credentials to make a livable wage, and if they go to some religious community, if they have a community, a church, they are flourishing as a human being. God's truth shows itself everywhere, doesn't it? Y'all should be more excited about that, but stay calm, because if you get hyped up, then I'll get hyped up. That's not good. So according to the data, there were 2 major ways urban churches could be leveraged. The first has to do with credibility. The following stat is the most unbelievable in our present historical moment, and that is this: strong majorities of attendees of urban congregations say that their church leadership is trusted to act in the church's best interest at 91%, and is very responsive at 84%. Well, you might say, oh, yeah, of course. Duh, right? That's the way it is. This stat is only positive in 2 areas when it comes to religious research. In other words, when you ask urban folk, it's this positive, and it's great. If you go to the suburbs, it's a disaster. That number is super low. If you go to African-American churches, this number is high. If you go to any other racial group, it's not very high, okay? So this finding right here is a rare bright spot in the dim pattern of waning faith in religious institutions in general, the U.S. church at large, and the pastorate. The urban church is still seen as a credible institution in urban spaces. Now, that might not mean anything to you in the Bible Belt, but trust me, I live in Cincinnati. I'm the Bible Belt buckle, okay? It ain't just show up and be a pastor and people look at you as something positive, right? In other places outside of the Bible Belt, credibility is not easily given to pastors or churches. This is unbelievable. And we should build on the bright spot, because the way to move forward is to find out your strengths. Any of you taking Strength Finders? Right. Strength Finders goes on the assumption that you move forward if you know your strengths. If you know your 5 top strengths, your weaknesses don't matter. If you leverage those strengths, as long as character's not involved, all right? If you're a drug dealer, well, yeah, it'll matter. But if character's not involved, you hang on your strengths, and it is your strengths that will move you forward and make you a success. So this, in the urban space, if you have an urban church, you need to know you're seen as a credible person. Your church is seen as a credible institution, and that should change the way of how you view the neighborhood and view the community and how you're going to engage it. We need to build on this bright spot, because urban neighborhoods want us at the table. So for the type of community engagement wanted, When asked how local churches can better serve communities, unchurched neighbors hope for more collaboration and communication from churches. They actually want to hear more from us. Our neighbors have spoken and said they value us as potential partners. So let's take a look at the following stat. Through partnership, the local church plays a key role. When a congregation becomes an institutional partner with local businesses, schools, and so on, it becomes a church with no walls and a transformative influencer. That is the pathway we can earn the right to share the gospel. A quick example from a gazillion years ago when I was a youth pastor at a neighborhood in Cincinnati. I was a youth pastor long enough to know I ain't supposed to be a youth pastor, okay? But when I was a youth pastor, I went out and I built a relationship with the local middle school. And one day while I'm talking to the principal says, we have no after-school activities for our kids. That's our biggest problem. The school district is strapped for money. They send all their money for extracurricular activities to the high schools. Middle school, we don't have it. And on the spot, which I don't recommend, I said, you know what? I'm a former basketball player. I will start a basketball team and our church will sponsor it. I ain't talked to the senior pastor. I ain't did nothing. I just saw the need and I said, I will make sure your team has your school has a basketball team. And he was ecstatic. He was excited. I leave and I'm in my car and I'm like, oh God, what did I just promise? Because I have no idea what's going to happen. But I'm going to show you how God does. I got back to the church office and I walk in and there's 15 basketballs in the middle of the lobby. And I go to the senior pastor. I said, what are these basketballs for? He said, oh, there was some basketball camp and they ordered too many basketballs and they asked us, did we want them? Look at God. Long story short, I coached that team for 3 years. We ended up starting a team. And when we left, that school had like 10 different offerings for after school. Do you think they cared if I did a Bible study there? Do you think they cared if I prayed before this? Nope, nobody cared about any of that because we built goodwill within the community and opened the door for the gospel to be shared. Through partnership, the local church plays a key role and we earn the right. That's the new evangelism, you all. I've been trained in everything. I've been trained in Romans Road. I've been trained in evangelism explosion. I've been trained in everything. The new evangelism takes longer and is built on relationship. You have got to get to know people first before they want to hear what you have to say about Jesus. You just show up and start, do you know, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life. They don't want to hear it. You have to know them first. They have to know that you care about them. And then once you have established that, now they'll listen to you about Jesus. So when we build belonging, the other component of moving Jesus into the neighborhood has to do with that. Both church and unchurched agree Christian churches are well positioned to address the problem of loneliness. This is a remarkable stat as well. We should figure out how to make our churches a third place. And before I get into that, let me tell you on the stat. And the question for each of the following issues, which institutions do you feel are well suited to address them? And this is a percentage. So from the church and the unchurched people in urban spaces, they both said, I want the church to help me with my problem of loneliness. Both of them have said that. Now, for the church folk, okay, that's to be expected. That's why you join small group and all that good stuff. But isn't it remarkable? The unchurched said, you know what? I don't know if I believe in Jesus and all that stuff, but boy, if that institution can help me be less lonely, I'd consider church. They're looking for that. And so there's this concept called the third place. It's been around forever. The term originated with sociologist Ray Oldenburg in his book, The Great Good Place. A third place is a social communal space that is not work and is not home. There have been a number of businesses that built its business model around that. You may have noticed last week or so, there's been some news about Starbucks is struggling right now because it's struggling with its business model because its original business model was the third place. It wasn't come buy coffee for us. It was come hang out here. And while you're hanging out here, oh, by the way, here's some coffee. That's how Starbucks started. I'm old enough to remember when Starbucks used to give you real plates. Anybody old enough for that? You walk in, you get a real cup, you get a real place. They'd have music playing, and it was like just a great space to hang out between meetings, whatever, meet a friend, this, that, the other. That's how Starbucks was built. That's what a communal third place is. How can we utilize that concept as a church? When I was pastoring at River of Life Church, we had a food pantry. But it was so much more than a food pantry because you could come in and you could get food. But we also had a spiritual station, we called it, where we had a church member who would sit in the back. And if you wanted prayer, you can go back there and you can get prayer. Every now and then we'd have a light Bible study. And you could go back there and you could build community. The unchurched people didn't know it, but that's called small group. Right? And then we also had a partnership with Xavier University, which was a Jesuit Catholic school in Cincinnati, in their nursing program. And their nursing students would sit at another station, and their nursing students would ask health questions of those folks. We even had, I think they did a finger prick type thing where they tested their diabetes level and things of that nature. And if they found anything wrong with them health-wise, they would then send them to the local health clinic, which was around the corner. That's that partnership idea, right? We would have people who would come to the food pantry who didn't even get food. Be like, what are you doing? You need food? Oh, no, Pastor, I don't need food. I'm just going to go over here and get me a prayer. Need food? Oh, no, Pastor, I don't need any food. I'm just going to go over here and get my cholesterol checked. It was a third space. It wasn't work. It wasn't home. It was a place that they chose to come in. And then, well, guess what would happen? People would die in their family, and they didn't belong to a church, and they didn't have any money. So how were they going to bury them? Guess who buried their family members? River of Life Church. Did so many free funerals, don't even know how many. I can't even tell you how many. Do you think the neighborhood appreciated that? There are people at River of Life Church who have never come to a Sunday service, but if you ask them what's their church home, they'll say River of Life. When I was pastoring, we would say we have a community congregation who we will never see here on Sunday, because we felt like we were pastoring the neighborhood, not just having a worship service. I promise to you, I'm not going to start preaching right now. I will just repeat myself. We saw ourselves as the pastor of the neighborhood, not just having a worship service on Sunday. I'm going to leave that right there. Let's move on. River of Life. At World Impact, we have a theory of change of how we can impact the world. It is trained urban pastors and congregations lead to healthy urban churches, which leads to community engagement in the ways that I've shared with you about being that third space. And what Barna has said is that leads to flourishing neighborhoods. So if anybody asks you, what's the cheapest and most effective way that a church can impact its neighborhood, it's simply building relationships and becoming a third space. All right? All right, look at that, 27 minutes. All right, I'm going to go back. So let's open the floor for questions.
We need Chris, are you passing the mic? Okay. So we'll just have Chris, we'll walk around to you. Turn it on. So that's what you were telling me. Yes. This is the Sarah disease. It was coined today. Okay, so Chris is going to walk around and make sure that you have a mic to ask your questions just so the whole room can hear you. So there was a question over here. That's where it was.
Yes,
okay.
Make sure you introduce who you are, where you're at, then ask your question.
I'm Alex Jackson from House of Hope Church. The question I have is, can a church that's in a temporary location, in a school or wherever, can they have that same impact? And if so, what would be the end result? Would the end result would it be just to impact the community, or to try to get the community to to discipleship, to disciple the community. So a church in a temporary location, can they still have that same impact? And what would you say the end result would be?
Yes, so I would say if a church has a building, it can have a bigger impact. But if you don't have a building, you can still have impact because the impact is through relationships. So the key is how can we build relationships with folk Monday through Saturday? In fact, not having a building might be to your advantage because you have to meet with whatever you do at a community location, right? So, like, say you're trying to, like, one of the easiest entries is going to a local school. I have yet to see an urban school if a pastor says, "Hey, I'm coming in. I would like to get my congregation mobilized to tutor your kids." If they say, "No, we don't want you here," right? So you can go and you can have congregants go tutor local kids for an hour a week. You don't need a building for that. You need a church building for that. And there's a ton of different things. We had a basketball team. We didn't have a gym, right? I told you about that. We had at the school. Schools are amazing resources to utilize, as well as other places, community centers, things of that place. There are needs, and the key is to figure out what are the needs of the community that your church can meet. So I'm going to give you a tool, if you're not familiar with that, of what I used when I planned up my church. It's called Asset-Based Community Development, ABCD, out of DePaul University. Go to DePaul University. I'm sure it's on there somewhere. And it teaches you how you can map your neighborhood and find out what the needs are. And you find out what the needs of the neighborhood are, and you find out what you can do. And it doesn't have to be 20 different things. It doesn't have to be this big macro thing. It could be one little thing the neighborhood doesn't have that you can connect. And that's how you can make a difference, through relationships.
Any other questions? Please say your name and where you're from.
Mike Haywood, College of Biblical Studies.
All right. Home game, home team.
Yes, sir. I just want to know, did you request this survey? And then what was behind the request? Was it a holy discontentment? And what was the origins of the survey?
Great question. So my board is some of y'all know this, most of you probably won't, but our board is a Carver Policy Governance Board, meaning that my job is 100% judged by the organizational performance. The board looks at the performance of the organization and they decide if I did a good job that year. Okay. So I have to go to court, so to speak. It doesn't sound as bad as I'm making it, but I have to prove. I can't just go to my board and say, "Yeah, we had a good year." I gotta have stats that say, "Yeah, we had a good year." So this theory of change that I have up here, it used to say trained urban pastors and congregations, healthy urban churches, flourishing neighborhoods. My board said, "How do you know that's true, Alvin? You don't have any data." Like, oh, okay. So I went out looking for someone to get data to prove this. And then when the data came back, and the board graciously sponsored the study, when the data came back, we inserted community engagement because that was my answer to the board. What we found is we train our pastors in the congregations, they build healthy churches, and then they engage the community and they make the community belong. They build belonging with the community, and that's their contribution to the flourishing neighborhood. And it was so good, we say, let's take it on tour. Right? So y'all are the fifth city that's seeing this.
Yeah, we don't want to hoard information. We want to share
No.
it for the good of your ministry.
That's right.
Any other questions?
Don't be bashful. I know y'all got questions. I know you got questions.
That's a great answer.
Yeah.
I'll go again.
There you go.
So in Houston, the metropolitan area, it looks like to me that the suburban churches are taking away from the urban churches. More of the suburban churches are I seem more like this flourishing church. They have more healthy engagements, but they're pulling away from the urban church. Is that a trend, or is that something you think will reverse?
You have to define for me taking away. I don't know what you mean.
As far as, well, if membership, yeah, membership.
Okay.
I see all the outlying churches are mega churches, where in the inner city they're mostly smaller churches. And so, is there a cannibalization going on, or is that because there's not enough engagement, or?
Well, yes, there's a cannibalization that's going on, but I've always said there's two things. One, God's re- God's report card is different than ours because we have a tendency to judge whether our church is doing well by the three B's: budget, butts, and buildings. All right. How big is our budget? How many butts do we have in the pews? How pretty is our building? That's not how God judges the church. All of the churches in the Bible, if you look at all the critiques, if you look at every single church that's been critiqued, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, the 7 churches in Revelation, all the churches have been critiqued. There is only one church that God does not say one bad thing about. Because most of the critiques are, you're doing this, great, but you need to repent of this. I'm preaching through Galatians now because I got the pulpit down my old church because we're between pastors. And it's like, oh man, Paul is mean. He's going to town, right? Most of it is critique in a bad sense. There's only one church he does not critique in a bad sense, and that's the Church of Philadelphia in Revelation. And he says, you're small but mighty. Okay, so let's first not judge our success based on the sizes of our congregations. Second, if you really are focused on evangelism and reaching the neighborhood, you will not have a problem with building up your congregation. What's the percentage of, even in the Bible Belt of Houston, there's way more unchurched than churched. So if you're not figuring out how to try to steal somebody else's people, and you're like, I really want to reach my neighborhood, at River of Life, when I was pastoring, we grew at 10 to 30% every year. And they say, Alvin, what's your secret? Evangelism. It's not rocket science. Yeah. We were heavily focused. Most of the people, when I left pastoring there, most of the people who went there they were unchurched. One time I tried to have I'm a traditional African-American Baptist boy, right? I tried to have a responsive reading. Nobody knew what to do. I was up there. I was like, what's wrong with these people? Then I realized, okay, they just got saved. They just got saved. Yeah. They're a year in the faith. These people don't know how to do a responsive reading, which is a good problem to have. Let's sing the doxology. What's that, Pastor? What's a doxology? That's awesome. Because that means I'm getting new people into the kingdom and I'm discipling them, right? So if we understand and use God's scorecard, right, and say, how can we reach our neighborhood? We should have a steady flow of people of congregational growth. I mean, let me be quiet. I'm going to get in trouble. Next question. Yeah, the question. Y'all almost got me going. I'm not going to get going. You are not going to get me going today. I'm not going to do it.
One of the challenges you addressed is the meaning of church being contested, redefined, deconstructed.
Yes.
I think for urban pastors, I'm just going to frame it a little bit. One of the challenges we have is in poor neighborhoods is I think the church at times gets focused on a lot of different angles and trying to serve the community. So if that happens, we can shift focus to maybe social engagement more than disciple making or vice versa, whatever. How do we as Christians and Christian leaders make sure that we understand that definition and actually not fall into those traps of church redefinition, I guess is my question.
Yeah. And so the key is to be focused on how do we make this neighborhood a better place? We're not trying to change the gospel. We're not trying to do anything. We're just trying to make the neighborhood a better place. And we're trying to create a civic space, which is rare nowadays, if you don't know that. A civic space where people can engage in one another in good faith and understand one another's perspectives, right? And be able to disengage in a way that has their dignity intact, right? So how do we create those spaces in with our strengths of what our flavor is? So again, when I was pastoring, I guess because I used to play sports, we had a ton of former athletes there. Like we were right down the street from University of Cincinnati. So a lot of football players, basketball players, they would make their way to our church and this, that, the other, right? So sports became our common thing. So we would start basketball teams, or we would have we would have our men's group would, tailgate at the UC football games and do things around sports, because sports was like the glue to the neighborhood. You want to come to a Bible study? Nobody's saying, I want to come to your Bible study. You want to come to a men's tailgate, get a free ticket for the University of Cincinnati football game? I'm all ears, right? So that's the third space. So utilizing that concept. No one's asked me to lessen my morals or do anything like that. It's just come here. It's low commitment. Let's hang out. Let's build a relationship. And I'm telling you all, you can build relationships with people, which will eventually lead to the gospel being shared and people living correctly. I walked out one time and somebody came up to me and they said, Pastor, we need a marriage policy. I said, what are you talking about? He said, half this church is living together. I said, okay, I guess we hit our target market. Now, what are we going to do with them, right? So I called each and every one of them couples into my office and I said to them, tell me, why aren't you married? And they would say, well, my mama has 20 different divorces and my daddy was a Rolling Stone, and they have all these reasons of why they were scared of marriage and why they didn't get married, and this, that, the other. And I say, well, if you're willing to sit with me for 6 weeks and let me make the case for you to get married, but more than that, even if you decide not to get married, I will help your relationship. I guarantee you, if you sit with me for 6 weeks, your relationship will be better, no strings attached. If you don't want to get married, that's fine. But if you do, I'll marry you at the end. You know what we call that? Premarital counseling. They didn't know that. So they're like, man, Pastor, this stuff works. I'm going home. I'm listening. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. And 100% of them at the end of that got married. You see how that works? That's how it works. Now, I could have said, y'all need to move out. And they're not going to move out anyway. I don't know why you're wasting your breath. So you got to figure out, how can I build rapport and relationship with them and get them to a true understanding of what God's word says, right? Because they're already showing up. So God's doing something. You always have to assume, I am preaching now, you always have to assume the Holy Spirit is active in the lives of the unchurched. It is doing stuff you got no idea what's happening. No idea. We had a couple who ended up getting married and getting saved because our tutoring program was working so well that one of the kids told one of the other tutors, I want to invite you to my church, out of the mouths of babes. And that little urban kid who the world wrote off brought her in to church, and she sat there and she said, this is interesting. Then all of a sudden, I see her boyfriend show up. And he said, this is interesting. Then all of a sudden, they're sitting in my office. And I say to him, why ain't y'all married? This is interesting. And then we do premarital counseling. Y'all don't hear me. We do premarital counseling. And they get married. And she ends up running the food pantry when we left. That's what we talk about, saints. That's the gospel. That's what it's about. Come on, we're time.
We're nearly there. We have time for one more question.
There you go. Or God. You can talk to me after this.
My name is Doug from House of Hope Church. And I don't know if it's a question so much as it is a statement. I agree with everything you're saying, but everything that you're saying is speaking from a non-bivocational view. You were a paid pastor.
Yeah, well, I was. Yes.
On staff.
Yes.
That was your job.
Yes.
You didn't have to go anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
I think what he was getting at is one of the challenges in Houston urban areas is pastors have to go work,
Yes.
at the plant
Yes.
and then come and preach. And so they don't have the time and the luxury that you're speaking about to be able to go and start a basketball team. And so I'm a PK.
Yes.
My father, rest in peace, and he was bivocational. He had a heart for the community, and he instilled that in all of his children. But he worked, and he worked hard.
Yes.
And it was very dysfunctional because of that.
Yes.
Now, he had a heart, and God used him in ways that I wish he would use me. But the reality is, the majority of a lot of churches in the inner city, and it's not just Houston. I'm originally from Minneapolis. The concept is the same all over.
Mhm.
In the inner city, the funding isn't there. And if the funding isn't there, I mean, how do you compete with the suburbs? How do you? It's not as attractive because for me, when I was raising my kids, I'm not taking them down the street because there's nothing there for them.
Mhm.
And the pastor's an alcoholic, and the whole community knows it.
Mhm.
So when I start looking for the light, security for my children, it wasn't in the inner city because I knew those pastors. I knew how many women he slept with yesterday, and I knew as a young man, I knew this.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't know if it's not a question, but the challenges are real, and we need more discussion.
Well, okay. So I don't know if this answer will give you hope or consternation. That story of me being a youth pastor, you assumed I was a full-time youth pastor. It was by vocation. So I'm not telling you something that I haven't lived out myself. Okay, because I was a bivocational youth pastor who volunteered his time to start a basketball team. Okay, and the congregation in which we have, we focus the congregation that our job is to reach the neighborhood. So it starts with the culture and the consciousness that you build into your congregation. So if you tell your congregation, because I'm a military brat, okay, so to me, when you become a member, you've been drafted. That's just the way my brain works. So we would tell all of our members to be a part of this church. We want you to volunteer 1 hour of your time in the neighborhood. Think about the drastic consciousness that you give your congregation if you tell them, we're here for this neighborhood. We want it to be a community. We want the community to know us. We don't want to be McDonald's that disappears, right? We want them to know who we are. We want you to find an hour a week. That's it. Not asking you to change the world, do anything like that. Find an hour a week to volunteer in the neighborhood. And then we said, here's a list of places that we have talked to, right? That would take you as a volunteer. Whether it's the zoo or whether it's this, whether it's that. And that's all we asked. It doesn't cost a whole lot. It costs time. That's all it costs. It didn't cost money. It didn't cost anything. And I think that's a big, it's a false notion that you need a ton of money to change a neighborhood.
Yes, yes.
You don't need it. I'm telling you, because I've done it. All you need is people willing to commit their time to make the neighborhood a better place. Right? So it wasn't until, I'm not sure when, half of my ministry, I was bivocational. And then the Lord blessed, and I was able to plant a church with the full backing of a suburban church. Again, we're not dogging the suburbs, because I could go into a whole nother hour of what the suburbs could do. Okay. But they put resource in. But half of my ministry career, I was bivocational. That's why most of the people we train at World Impact are bivocational. Right. So we're working with people who have a call and a heart and a challenge, as you said, to get things done in the neighborhood. But if we say we just want to play the role that we have, I'm an Ohio dude, so I'm about LeBron James, right? I'm all about LeBron, right? LeBron James says, be a star in your role. Don't come out here and try to be me. He's the GOAT, by the way. Don't debate me. Keep it to yourself. The GOAT says, don't try to be me, right? He says, Kyle Korver, just make a 3 when I throw you the ball. That's all I need you to do. I don't need to do anything else, right? Be a star in your role. So what if we had the mentality and the mindset, God, we want to be who we're called to be. God, you know how big we are. You know how many limited resources we are. Help us be a star in our role. Not try to be the big, flashy, new mega church out in the burbs. All right. Sermon number 3 is over.
That was a really good question. Thank you for
That was
asking.
an awesome question.